Kyiv's mayor, Vitali Klitschko, says another round of overnight airstrikes has caused heating and power outages in and around the Ukrainian capital. As Russia promised, there was no let-up in the attacks over the New Year holiday weekend. With little change on the battlefield as Russia's war nears the one-year mark, Ukraine is hoping weapons deliveries will help turn the tide in 2023. But so far, key Western suppliers have been holding back with some of their high-tech equipment that Kyiv wants most.
As the war drags on, the Ukrainians' weapon stocks are running down. Kyiv has repeatedly called for the West to help.
Apart from the energy aid, of course, Ukraine still needs more weapons and ammunition, because the best way to protect our civilians from Russian terror is to defeat Russia.
Can Germany send more military hardware? From the start, Olaf Scholz's answer has been consistent.
We try to supply weapons that are helpful and can be used. We have done that in the past and we will continue to do that. The successes of the Ukrainian army show that we have supplied effective weapons, anti-tank weapons, anti-aircraft weapons, a lot of ammunition.
So far, Germany has delivered around €2 billion worth of military equipment. That's only a tenth of the amount committed by the United States, but it is the largest EU contribution. Among the arms sent by Berlin, Iris-T long-range air defense systems, whose value has increased given Russia's concentration on airstrikes. Germany has also sent key battlefield weapons like Mars 2 rocket launchers and Panzerhaubitze 2000 self-propelled howitzers. In both cases, a lack of spare parts has caused delays when those systems needed repair, but they have been effective and more have been promised. What Ukraine really wants, though, is state-of-the-art heavy tanks like the Leopard 2. These, they say, would help win the ground war. The German government has so far refused, pointing out that other NATO countries have also not provided the most modern tanks. Instead, Berlin has delivered Leopards to NATO allies, like these supplied to Czech forces in December, part of an exchange deal under which the Czechs sent Soviet-designed T-72 tanks to Ukraine. Evidence, according to the Chancellor, that Germany is doing its bit.
Together with our friends and partners, we have resolutely supported Ukraine with money, humanitarian aid and also with weapons. We will continue this support for as long as it is needed.
The US has now agreed to send Ukraine Patriot air defense systems, some of its most advanced weapons. The German government has offered its Patriots to NATO member Poland, but so far says it cannot spare any for deployment in Ukraine. Meanwhile, Kyiv continues to ask the West for more of those powerful weapons. Much of what it has seems unlikely to make the decisive difference in this war.
We can take a closer look at this with Mike Martin, who's a War Studies Senior Fellow at King's College in London. Welcome back to DW, Mike. This war is consuming an enormous amount of munitions and spare parts, as we heard. Is there a danger that supplies could run out?
I think it's important to consider that all wars eventually become economic if they go on long enough. And we're seeing it not just on the Ukrainian/Western side, but also on the Russian side. Both sides, for different reasons, are running out of particular weapons. It takes a long time to get ammunition, a shell, from a factory to the front line, and that's what's proving difficult.
And we heard in the report that Germany's contribution is Europe's biggest, but only a tenth of that of the US. Are there countries that could be doing more?
There are countries that could be doing more. The problem is that what's happened until now is that Western countries have used up their own stocks that they keep if they ever end up in a war. Probably because they thought the war might be over in 6 months or a shorter period of time. Now it's very clear that the war is going to go on well into 2023. And in order to get the factories to produce more munitions, the governments have to sign contracts with those factories so they can ramp up production. And that's what's been happening over the last 6 weeks or so. So rather than it being a question of particular countries doing more, I think we could all do more, Britain, the US, France, Germany, etc. But it's actually quite an administrative question of actually sitting down and signing the paperwork so that the factories can ramp up production.
And what's happening on the Russian side in terms of munition supply?
Yeah, they have a similar problem with weapons shortages, but it's a bit different. So their problem is that because they've been under sanctions, very heavy sanctions since last February, but also since 2014, they're short of specific components. So microchips, gyroscopes, sensors, all that kind of stuff. So that's meant that they haven't been able to produce higher tech weapons like guided missiles. And so they've had to go to North Korea, Iran, those sorts of countries to get quite low technology weapons, so much cheaper, throwaway like these suicide drones that we've been seeing. But that's masked the fact that they've almost completely run out of the ability to produce high-tech munitions.
Right. And as we more than 300 days into this war, just give us a global overview. How do things stand?
So since really May, the Ukrainians have had momentum on their side. They've been setting the pace of the war. And as we've seen, there have been 3 major Russian pullouts of areas that they've previously held. At the moment, the war, the 3 fronts you want to look at are Crimea in the northeast, Bakhmut in the center-east, and Zaporizhia in the south. Very briefly, in Crimea, the Ukrainians have made some small advances in the last couple of weeks. In Bakhmut, the Russians have made some small advances at terrible costs to lives in the last month or so. And in the south, Zaporizhia, that's the big question mark, because that's the most obvious place for a Ukrainian offensive in 2023. And so both sides are reinforcing there and waiting to see what the other's going to do.
Thank you so much for that. It's very clear. Defence analyst Mike Martin.
Thank you.